the big weapons in the locker. Whether it'll be successful or not, maybe whether it's too early, maybe we need it. That needs to be a 5-year plan rather than a 2-year dash. I don't know, Andrew. You might be right on that, but I know that's part of the thing about the communities campaign is how do you revive a sense of a connection between who you are and what you do as a political citizen, rather than just a shoulder shrug, sod it, I can't be bothered, well, let's just let them get on with it. I think that's part of the element of what Yes Scotland is about.
We can always get Michael. You'd look very good in a toga, grow your beard out, and you can start harassing sophists in the agora.
Yeah, I'd quite like that. But
as long as you're not Diogenes, you know.
It's worth remembering though that Socrates was made to drink hemlock, so I don't know quite what the political lessons of that are for Yes Scotland. Okay. But I suppose Dan Hodges will tell us.
But I think there's possibly 3 elements to this because maybe broadly Andrew there is endorsing the kind of after Indy we won't rock the boat, it'll be much the same, but we'll decide will be the difference. Pat's suggesting we need to engage more radical ideas to pull out that vote. I'd suggest that Yes Scotland floats between the two positions at certain times, but there's not really been the aggressive one yet at any point. There's never been the, well, if you don't vote for independence, they're going to destroy this, and this. We've never seen that one. I'm not sure if that's tactically bad or tactically good to use that. We'll go to James there. Do you think that Yes Scotland is being too conservative, too negative, too nice? I mean, how do you feel they're doing so far?
I think what I would feel is that they don't need to be more radical, but they need to be more assertive. They have got on the back foot a lot. I mean, reading Stephen Noon, I think there seems to be almost like a kind of mantra or an article of faith, that if yes are positive and if no are negative, then yes will win, which may be true, but my gut feeling is you need a mixture of positive and negative messages. You need to say what's wrong with the United Kingdom in very, very specific terms, and then you balance that with the positive messages of how an independent Scotland would be better. I think there's also a possibility, to be cynical about it, of a sort of yes version of Project Fear or of the No to AB campaign, where you present very simple messages of what the Conservative Party will do in the next 15 years if we vote no. And then try and get the no campaign on the back foot and try and get them to have to rebut the negative messages for once.
I've already got the name for it. UK not okay. Yeah.
Or UK no okay. It's not like, I wonder, it goes back a wee bit to what we're talking about right at the beginning, but one thing I wonder, we often say that this kind of the level of debate is bad, but on things like welfare, things like actual serious conversations about what the state of an independent Scotland should be, but is one of the reasons for this partly because we don't really have a very developed idea about this. I mean, for example, the SNP prospers politically largely because it sits in a middle political territory, making these sort of social democratic noises while not having any responsibility for lots of areas of actual activity which would require kind of a tough choices, as they say politically, about these questions. And it does very well for them politically. And so you could argue, I suppose, if it works for the SNP, why not make it work for Yes Scotland? Vague social democratic ambitions. If you begin to define it, you begin to multiply potential divisions. Therefore, a sort of chubby community of the realm, yada yada yada, all that kind of stuff is actually something which might fly because the Scottish people quite like it.
I think we can move on to another topic. On last week's episode, we spoke a little bit about the YouGov poll, which had no as 2-1, but quite a lot of work during the week sort of suggesting that there were major flaws with that poll. And James, you did some work on that. But since then, we've had another poll putting yes in front and another one saying don't know is in front, which is it's covering the spectrum. But on your site, Scot Goes Pop, you do a lot of work on polls. What do you think's going on with these different polls suggesting, well, radically different things?
Well, obviously the weighting seems to be an issue. YouGov weight by the 2010 Westminster election, panel-based weight by the 2011 Holyrood election, and TNS-BMRB don't weight at all, and they're somewhere in the middle. It was interesting that panel-based released a statement, and they were saying that they think the difference between the polls isn't primarily caused by the raw responses of respondents. They think it's caused by what they do, the weighting, and also by the fact that they filter by certainty to vote. John Curtis suggested that panel-based would be he suggested they might be more in line with the other pollsters if they used the same question order. I don't think that's very likely, but I think if that was true, it would actually be very good news for the Yes campaign because it suggests that the no vote is extremely soft. And if all the other pollsters just used a couple of extra questions before asking the main question, you suddenly get a very close result. So that would suggest the no vote is actually quite soft.
And Andrew, you dabble in psephology, I believe. So, did you have any thoughts on the wildly differing polls this time?
I'd make your head burst, wouldn't it? I mean, and it's quite funny to see that. So, I mean, the main thing is, I suppose, you see is that polls are used to buck people up and to press other folk, and I must say, I'm at a bit of a loss with it. I take all of what James has said there, and I saw much of the commentary suggesting that it's quite difficult to know how to weight an independence poll to start with, and secondly, that these other weights lead you down particular directions. I suppose what James is saying there, if only ask a couple more questions before we ask people, should Scotland be an independent country, then the lesson for the Yes campaign is to have a couple of activists standing outside every polling station and barking forth, these other questions. That seems to me the cunning strategy. I shall suggest it to Stephen Noon if I spot him in the street. I'm sure that'll go down well.
Pat, did you have any thoughts on these polls?
Well, I mean, one of my ambitions is to kind of sort out Nate Silver, the kind of the great American polling guru who seems to be able to kind of stare into the statistical entrails of any phenomenon and predict exactly what's going to happen. So if there's any justification for Scottish independence, it's to rub his nose in it a wee bit. But I mean, the thing about polls, I feel about polls the way I feel about my favoured football team, which I'm not going to reveal, but it may be easily guessable from my ethno-linguistic surname, is that you can't do anything about it. If you get a good one, I resent the feeling of walking on air that I have when it was a 45% lead for the Yes camp from one random bunch of people pursued on the internet by panel base, and of course I'm in a slough of despondent elements, and of course we all invoke the psephological bizarreness of a Labour SNP neck and neck coming up to 2011, and the ground game, the get out, the vote game, the cybernetic, manage your demography game, making them defy the very proportional rules of the Parliament in terms of giving them a majority. So I must admit, I'm turning my face away from that quite trad calculus of how we measure political progress in the independence campaign. I think it's an activist year. I really do, but I don't think it's just activism, turning up to rallies and turning up to big concerts and being, like the kind of Catalonian 95,000 concert in the Bernabeu. That's fine. That's or the Nou Camp. Sorry, that's fine. That can happen. But I think the real game, actually, if you want to kind of defy the conventional wisdom of how you amass politics, is to get out and do a bit of Gandhi. Be the Scotland you wish to see. Get out and deal with people. In a 360-degree way, talk, converse. On that angle, Stephen Noon is exactly correct. And then you make the weather of political consciousness. You don't sit back and wait until some polling organisation decides to inflect it this way and that way.
And I think that's I was talking to, funnily enough, this week to a unionist who will remain unnamed, but a devotee whose mind is not to be shifted. But anyway, he was saying interestingly that he's got great worries and anxieties about the whole Better Together campaign as presently situated. Firstly, for campaigning reasons. I mean, as I've pointed out before, it's not the Labour Party are going to have to really bear the brunt of this on the streets, bringing the argument out to people's homes and communities, and on their own terms, they're not interested in independence. So I think that the balance of impetus in terms of activists on the street, I would guess, though I don't know yet because I've been locked in the house, but is in Scotland in the Yes Scotland side, and I think that's a really great fillip for us. And he was worried that if you just exist in this kind of air campaign level, if you just exist churning out polls saying, winning, it's all nationalists in the dirt, everything's going pear-shaped for Yes Scotland, then you don't have much of an answer practically if things become more personal. You don't really have the people in place, the activists on the ground who are able to maybe change people's minds in a way which a poll is never likely to pick up, particularly if, as I suspect, people are going to be disgruntled, will not quite know what they're going to do before they go into the ballot box on September the 18th next year, and maybe will become sordid nationalists just for not even 90 minutes, but at least for 5.
Some of them might be sordid nationalists. Some of them might be reignited citizens. I mean, I was looking at the Democracy Max proposals. I'm in, and they're fine. They've been sort of echoed previously by Commonweal when they sort of made the point, or the Reid Foundation when they made the point of the poor levels of democratic representation in Scotland compared to other European countries. But take the Democracy Max thing, and then I don't know if anyone's been reading Leslie Riddoch's book Blossom, which I would totally recommend to anybody. It's a fantastic book because what she just does is run around Scotland seeing people who take their future into their own hands and act on it. And I think there is a kind of, it's often called civic Scotland, but it's probably more likely to be community Scotland. The idea that that you could reignite the idea that being an active person, seizing control of your conditions, in the way that lots of activism has done, in the way lots of people, the big society, try to exploit that from the Tories angle. But the idea that you can connect that energy up to a higher level, which is the fate of the country itself, I think may be the secret sauce in this whole campaign. I think we might not have enough time, and it may be something that rolls on for a couple of years. I hope we get there in time, but it's basically a revived citizenship that I think is going to get us a yes vote.
Well, that's why I put on my blog this week a silly little joke poll, and it was more or less a joke. I'm happy to announce it had no weighting and a heavy selection bias, and I managed to get a 97.45 result for no, with about 500 votes. But the question was, if the monarchy did not exist, would you wish to create one to perform the functions of head of state? And we got 97.45% no and 2.55% yes. And I'm amazed yes got 11 votes in that case. But no, I put that on there just as a point to say, okay, it's a bit of a joke poll. It's not a serious, psephological thing. But the point is, we're missing this point that independence brings us a chance to remodel our country completely, not just carry on the same old, same old. And I thought that was really why I was doing it. I mean, that idea is going back to first principles. If it wasn't there, would you actually wish to create one? And I'm still shocked it managed to get 11 votes.
But you can channel that radical energy. I mean, yes, absolutely, a Republican myself, but you can channel that energy into things like land reform, into energy generation, into the kinds of how do we create strong, Mittelstand kind of jobs that people like Robin McAlpin are talking about with Commonweal. There's a road through the middle to improving the basic quality of Scottish life that I think can be the appeal of Yes. I mean, I think the reason why it's called Yes Scotland is because they want to create a nation that goes around affirming things. That can be done. Yeah, let's try that. It may well be that's the power, that's the secret power that we have that will hopefully roll to a triumphant climactic conclusion in a year's time, he said, hopefully.
But then I suppose that might be Stephen Noon's one possibly negative comment, is that it wasn't negative, it's just a fact that a lot of people don't engage in politics. So, I mean, this kind of idea, just to contradict what I said before as well, but it's another side to it, is that a lot of people aren't particularly engaged with politics. So this kind of talk is good for political activists, but maybe not so good for the public in general, because a lot of people aren't that interested, to be honest.
Yeah, but if it's politics, it's about what you do with your local facilities in a community, what you do about the fact that you might have an argument about how you generate energy in your area, or how you encourage local business, or what you do with procurement. There's a whole frontier of ways that Scots can feel more in control of their lives that should be the handmaiden of independence. I mean, that's exactly what it should be about. You look at all the national movements in the 19th and 20th centuries in the Scandinavian countries and the Nordic countries. It was all about, this is the moment whereby we can upgrade the quality of the citizenry. It was lots of education initiatives, cultural initiatives that all went along with the establishment of a nation state. We're coming to that party late, but we're actually coming to it with incredibly more powerful tools than they had then, and we're also doing it not in a state of penury. I mean, if you ever wanted a national revolution, Scotland's revolution is the piss easiest one there ever was.
Yeah, I can see that. James, any thoughts on that?
Well, I was just going to say that if you had run your poll on the Daily Mail website, you would have got the completely opposite result. To go back to what Pat said a lot earlier about there's nothing you can do about polls. Well, in the literal sense, there is something you can do about polls, which is to commission one of your own. Because, for example, YouGov are notorious now for using a preamble which turns a question about an independent Scotland into a question about leaving the United Kingdom. My suspicion is that had something to do with the Daily Telegraph previously commissioning polls from the Telegraph and possibly pushing them in that direction, and they've carried on in that vein. The SNP have commissioned a poll this week, and that obviously turned out very positively for them, and they presumably deliberately chose the pollster that they knew was most likely to produce a favourable result for Yes. So there is something you can do about polls, and it has a major effect because, the reason why there is this narrative in the London media about the foregone conclusion that the No campaign will win is simply because of the polls. If you could somehow produce 2 or 3 polls in a row that showed a very close race, then the narrative would change and everything would be completely different.
There's an elephantine blogger in the room of this conversation.
Oh yeah, Reverend Stuart Campbell, yeah.
I'm not sure you'd appreciate being described as